Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Yurugu study, chapter 10, pages 541 to 552. I'm just going to start with my summary of what I learned. Um, we learned how the Yurugu, the white people, the Europeans, how they use this idea of humanitarianism, of being a humanitarian, how they have been using this idea to conquer the planet, to excuse other cultures, other ways of existence, and to implementing themselves and their way of life across the planet. So they'll say that we care about humanity, we care about um, humans, but it's mentioned that they have a love for man, and if we relate that to the ISIS papers, man is coded as white people. So white Europeans, the Yurugu, most certainly only love themselves. They have spent their entire existence on planet Earth serving only themselves at the cost of all non-white people, and they have used terms as internationalism, humanitarianism. These terms are coded as our codes for we're going to continue our business of domination and white supremacy, and those who will be affected the most are non-white people. And I'm going to send it over to Ash, or someone else can just volunteer, but I would.
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, this section was about the idea of, I guess, humanism and how the European culture uses this like abstract idea of humanism, and they look down on the idea that African-centered cultures kind of have a group, not like prioritize their group and connectedness to their group. And she also goes into like kind of like critiquing the anthropological research and how it's based on, I guess, humanism, but a very like constricted humanism that doesn't actually put you in the place of understanding whatever you are so-called observing. And then she just ends it with kind of a reiteration of the idea of universalism in European ideology, and that universalism is not really universalism, it's really just European, like, I guess, hegemony or control. So I guess I'll pass it to Kweku.
Yes, thank you. For me, this section, concrete humane behavior versus abstract European humanism, it was kind of reiteration from earlier on in the book when she talks about how Europeans are more concerned about their image than they are with themselves. I saw a lot of this when we had the white people at our meeting, using very abstract terms to describe the kind of existence, I guess, that we're trying to go for here. And really that the European definition of humanism is really just defined in abstract terms. They don't really actually do any of the things that they say that they want to do, or that they are trying to do. And that what they say doesn't really match their actions. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to Nanaya.
Thank you, Koiku. Just to do my summary really quickly, thinking about like going into the chapter, we're talking about humanism, and if like basically it's basically doing a contrast, compare and contrast between like what humanism means in like European culture and what humanism means within like African culture. And I think it's very clear within the section that we read that it's almost like Europeans, as we mentioned before, they cannot attain humanism due to their Asili and Utumoroho. And I think one of the things too is like, although they will continue to strive and throw this word out, but it's almost like an abstract word, as many of you already said, is that it's abstract and there's not really a definition behind it other than, I guess, hope. Or not even hope. It's almost just like a word that they feel would be accepted by others or make them feel like included. But in reality, they have these, what they said called weapons, and whether they're visible or tangible or physically, but they're all just like for destruction, but they hide it under this word called humanistic and being humanized. And then she also mentioned a few others who have researched this idea, but they all come to the same conclusion that they just cannot, Europeans cannot reach it. And one of the other parts they talked about was the idea of, I believe it was like trans-substantive error, basically like mistakes that Europeans make intentionally. And then it talks about how that is used to dehumanize others. And then those who are in the other group, like non-white people, they also have this idea, or they make mistakes as well, also known as trans-substantive errors, but it's not the same as Europeans because it's not intentional. As when the Europeans make mistakes, it's almost like we did it. And then for others, it's more of and like not an intentional, so it was an accident, or it wasn't for the thought of dehumanizing or mistreating others. And also it talked about, sorry, I just remembered about like, it had this, I don't want to say like linear, but this almost this explanation between like what a good person is. And it talks about like how it's down to like universal man and then international, which we'll get into later, but that was just like how it went down. I don't want to say like linear, but that's how it went in order of like how the European thinks, or European Utumolozo thinks. And I'm gonna pass it to Sir.
My quick summary would be that the whole concept of even being a human is something that non-white people do not have. They're others, they're not humans. And also how all these abstract ideals of what a human is and what a good person is. And what really stuck out to me was the part where there was the this is what a man is and this is what a female is, and these are the attributes to the male and female, and all the unnecessary traits, they just associate that with the feminine, the female, and also non-white people and others, and all the traits that are about dominance and being stern and ambitious are all associated with not humans, but white people, like those who classify themselves as whites. And it's just like the continued use of words and abstract ideas just to continue the domination. Business per usual. And we'll like go more and more as we go. And I'll pass it to Mary. I'm not sure if Mary is there, so. Silent Warrior.
Sure. Um, this is a really dense text, and what I find interesting is the way she describes the Asili and Utumaroho, the spirit energy, as the Asili is empty, the spirit is been removed, and it makes up for it by continuing to compensate for it with increased power. That's the power drive. I'm still learning to understand the role that abstraction. Well, abstraction is because spirit is removed, so things become more and more removed from itself. This division into the self and the other, where the self is male and the other is female, in one sense. Also that the self is logical and the other is irrational. And it makes me think about I made a small analysis of King Kong the other day. King Kong versus Godzilla, where King Kong is an ape, and he represents somewhat the mammalian brain, and then Godzilla is the reptilian brain. And so these two brains are fighting, but both of them are the emotional part of the brain. So both of them are dangerous to humans. Humans in the movie represent like the high brain, the neocortex. I see some similarity between what Marimba Ani is talking about here and some of the symbology, like how you can use it to tie it in with the symbology. Like I had a small idea that there's something to do with this concept of whiteness and white fragility. I mean, they talk about white fragility as it is not connected to white people, it's so abstract. This abstractation and objectification helps them with destruction, which is why killing people is fun in movies and in video games. But then at the same time, they need to have an other in order to have a self. They need to have an other that they will conquest and control. So when Fuller is saying that white people will either have to give us justice or kill everyone, kill all non-white people, but he doubts that white people will kill all non-white people. So we use the code to force them to end the system. I can see that this is being supported by Annie, because without the other, she says, there's no possibility of power. It is in this sense the European culture can never be self-reliant or even constructively isolationist. So they won't kill all the non-white people, they will tailor them. I had a small wonder if, all right, I'll skip that idea. Somehow I think about the power ideology, and I think there's something in this book that will help explain why they're currently so focused on climate change and using climate change as a way to restructure the society. Later on page 566, where she says, the idea of Africans seeking equality from Europeans is an a political approach to reality. Equally absurd is the attempt to enlighten or change them. It is not going to work because that's not part of their Utumaroho. And here in Norway, Norway is very big on NGOs and humanitarianism. They they award the Nobel Prize every year, Nobel Peace Prize every year, and they have many organizations, many international NGOs that they say do work around the world to relieve suffering in the so-called third world. And I've worked in one of them before, and like you go in their the head office of the Red Cross in Norway has images of non-white people in destitute state on the wall. There are no images of non-white people in a recovered state after a bad event. It's just like them barely getting water together. Like, this is what white people have on their wall in the headquarters of the Red Cross of Norway. Many other, they collected money. They put images of suffering Black children to this day as a method to collect money and to promote their work and to say that they're doing good work. So this humanitarian, I've always felt strangely about it. And it's been, I see her saying it here, humanitarianism becomes paternalism, a disguised form of European supremacy. Because some of the people, Norway has a lot of welcomes refugees, but how often do these refugees get any position of power in the country? It's paternalism. You will integrate and become Norwegian, but somehow they never get power. They never get to rise in any significant way. We have now someone who's a son of immigrants, who's the minister of culture, and he gets racist attacks. Anyway, so their so-called humanitarianism as paternalism is very evident in Norway. And I think here in Norway, because it's a tiny country, and their only claim to fame amongst their fellow white countries is they do a lot of NGO work, a lot of humanitarianist work. They deliver the Peace Prize. They have the so-called moral high ground. But 2 out of 3 people in Norway are now admitting that racism is a problem in the country. Anyway, and finally, on 567, where it says the culture is Faustian. For success, it has sacrificed its soul. That makes me think about entertainers who we say, yeah, they've sold their soul in order for fame. But I thought it was really cool, interesting and cool when she's saying the entire white supremacy culture has sold its soul. Yeah, and she says Europe is the cultural home of a people who identify as one race, banding together for survival and destruction of others. Fuller says the only reason you have race is to be able to practice racism. They would destroy each other if there were not others to destroy. They fear and hate blackness, which they associate with spiritual power, a power which they can neither possess, create, nor control. Yeah, makes me think of Wilson's chapter in ISIS papers, that melanin is a neurochemical basis for spirituality. But that's all I have from that section, Power as Logos. And I should pass it on to, I don't know, I pass it back to you, sir, 05.
Mary.
Mary.
Yes, hi. Yeah, so concrete human behavior versus abstract European humanism. I really enjoyed the way that she just shared in this chapter, the way that anthropologists would have been given power by the Europeanists Seeley and Utamawozo, and has put them in a position where, like she describes Mary Kingsley's comment, it's put them in a position where their own commentary on human behavior and their own expression of humanism literally showcases their lack of humanism or lack of wanting to understand by forcing us to have to view it in that European lens. Like, for instance, where she says, where she describes Mary Kingsley's characterizations of the motivations of West Africans, where she comments on her comment: the individual is of supreme importance to himself, and he values his friends and relations, but abstract affection for humanity at large, or belief in the sanctity of lives of people with whom he is unrelated, the African barely possesses. She then says, according to this same humanistic attitude referred to the statements, it is though the exposure to other moralities that people can learn to overcome their own tribal morality. Even in their statement that they how it's described, it's like saying the only way that Africans can be humanistic is if they expand or encourage that mentality of expansion and going and making themselves related to the neighboring countries outside of themselves, which is something that historically has proven that was definitely a thing of nomadic travel amongst Africans. But even just how it just shows like the power that they've given their anthropologists, as if it was in relation to this is that abstract perspective and the power that they've given their scientific their scientific powerhouses that encourages their Sealy and try to make that universalism. That's exactly sorry, the point that I was trying to make is slipping me. Yeah, so the way that they try to make that universalism, that's exactly the parallel imagery to for me, religion and the preacher. They have replaced the preacher of the conditioning of the minds through spirituality into conditioning it through this abstract information of scientific knowledge that is in their form now the new spirituality. Yeah, and pass that to whoever hasn't read on this.
Everyone's gone, thank you. I want to read from 541 because I think this is a real, really important as to how this humanist nonsense has been used and what it is being used for. So 541 states, if one is a European humanist, one loves man with a capital M, but it doesn't work out that way, for the demands of the latter have no relationship to the concrete love and identification with other human beings. One represents a very controlled and purely speculative and theoretical attitude. The other is a reflection of an emotional tie, a sympathetic relationship, a feeling of identification. European humanism is in this regard an extension of the universe, so imperative in European ideology, to conceptual ethics, to speculative moral philosophy. The rhetoric of ethical motivation is placed into the syntax of universalism and abstraction. So what this is communicating to me is that white people have used like so they say they call themselves a humanitarian, and then they like to imagine a world where like humanity is at peace and humanity is all together. But this is what is later mentioned as double speak. Their actions have never once in history correlated to them actually wanting a world in peace and actually wanting everyone to come together. It is, as she said, purely speculative and purely a form of control that they have been able to use against non-white people, against people who are not white. For example, they like if I am a non-white country, and then they come to my area talking about, don't you want to be a humanitarian? Don't you want peace and all humanity to come together? If I were to say no, that's a reason for them to employ their destructive tools against me, or for them to paint me as some sort of savage who doesn't want peace, who doesn't want to live in a humanitarian world. But humanitarian world has not ever existed. It's just their words as weapons manifest is what we should understand this humanitarianism as just words as weapons. And it's just so incredible how not only have they devised the most literal physical weapons of mass destruction in the forms of bombs, guns, and technologies that can perhaps even produce earthquakes and change the weather, but they have a huge arsenal of just words that have been used for thousands of years to subjugate and dominate non-white people, and really important to give like I give thanks to Marimba Ani because this is like simply incredible that she has been able to decode the European mind, to decode their behavior in such a necessary manner. Um, I'll leave it there to see if anyone has any comments to share.
Yeah, I wanted to comment. I had that part highlighted as well. I like the part after it where it says this in opposition to the natural attachment to family, kin group culture, or as it is derogatively termed tribe. If one is a European humanist, one loves man with a capital M. I think it's important that that this idea of it being being abstract, and the fact that it's implied, right? So it's like almost as if every single thing a European does, it's like it's implied that they're doing this for their love of humanity. All the with scientism, all the slave experiments that they did, it's implied that they were doing this for the betterment of humanity. And really how they turned like tribalism into like you and your group into something to be negative, meaning that it's important that one loves man with a capital M, as she put it. I think that's kind of funny and like almost homoerotic or something, but the fact that the European has kind of with their basic ideas have really gotten us to fall for this love of humankind. Everything that we're doing is for the betterment of humanity. I think shows the confusion that they really managed to implement with other majority groups. Oh, making sense. That's all I got for right now. Some other stuff might come to me.
Can I jump back in real quick and like make up for the preview of the next chapter?
Please do say.
That was slightly embarrassing, but hey. All right, 5, 4, 3. One is considered to be highly moral if the language that one uses is couched in the syntax of abstraction and of universality, that is, of disinterest. I'm highly objective, that means I'm highly moral. Like doctors, medical doctors, who have people's lives in their hand, the best like the highest skilled doctors, for example, neurosurgeons, are expected to be highly objective. If you read Ben Carson's autobiography, you get a sense of his observation of the field, and his distinction amongst them was his caring, his ability to like care for people. They speak with a forked tongue. I really like what you said, 05, words as weapons. That's their forked tongue. But that's also that forked tongue implies two, duality, self and the other. They see themselves and they see the other that they have to dominate. And the way they see morality is different from other cultures, where you have to be able to do what you say. And also the 544, where Franz Fanon is telling people to leave Europe. And all of these triumphs of their mind, all of their rationalization has ended up with suffering for the other people of the world. Cool.
And then
That's
just
it for me.
Thank you, Silent Warrior. And just to add to that, also, one of my notes here, it has on page 550, it talks about how humanism is defined like in the European culture as being abstract, but also she mentions that humanism is more of a spiritual thing and not rational. So I think one of the things, like looking in today's society, is we're almost like turning to the European to like be more humanistic, but it's almost not, it's not even in their DNA to obtain that. So as I'm reading it, I'm trying to think of obviously like more solution things, like how can we as a group not only just like spread this awareness, like obviously we can tell people to read and then share the pages and all these things, but go beyond that and to change our minds to not believe, but more so act in a manner of we need to solve this and not turn to the European. Because oftentimes we're like, okay, if European has the most power, we almost have to ask them, hey, can you stop being European? You know, but I think it's more of just figuring out how we can, like as us in the group and also like Africans and non-white people together, like change our minds to almost, I don't want to use the word believe, but I guess I can just say like put action to taking it upon ourselves to be more humanistic. Since we already know from this book from Dr. Ani, who has literally researched this and said like it's not even in their like DNA, you know, they don't have this, they can't do this. So it's like if we were the only ones who can do it, what does this even look like? How do we do this? So those are some of the things I've been thinking about as I'm reading through this chapter or these pages. Well, the whole book actually is just like how to bring this to like where we are at today, like right now. Because obviously when we share this information, people are like, oh, that's false, or I don't believe that. But I don't think it's more so of like believing Dr. Ani, but I think it's more of just like, as I always think of Neely Fuller, who says, try it out and see, you know? So it's just like trying things out to see what the results are. So it's very interesting. Anyone have thoughts on that?
Ask a question. I would figure out, you know, one thing that has come across is that Fuller's approach, Fuller says nothing about spirit. Well, I mean, he has now put the word spirit in the updated code book. But in general, most of the approaches that non-white people are doing in this part of the world are not connected to the spiritual approaches that, for example, that Africans are somewhat doing now. They have some spiritual approaches that they are attempting to use. Doesn't seem to be wholly successful. Anyway, my point is that Fuller is brought up in a system. He's he's not a European, but we are all trained to think like them. We don't have that acili, you know. So I think it's a matter of the acili and not the DNA. We don't have that acili operating as a motivation within us. We're more secondary motivated as victims of a system constructed by white people that have this fear of genetic annihilation and this acili of being incomplete and needing to have power in order to complete themselves. And how do you share that with other people? Get increasingly good at understanding the work of Annie, Fuller, and Wilson, I would say, and being able to explain it, to communicate it. and also to like just take someone's words or current events and to interpret it. That seems to me what I've seen. That's what has been illuminating for me to hear. Like, for example, when you describe what you understand from her work, I get a deeper understanding of what is in front of me. Probably that is the way to help other non-white people. And as for changing white people's minds, I think what I'm reading in Yurugu, because Welton Talks does symbolic interpretation. And if human activity is thought, speech, action, and symbolic formulation, Isis Papers does the symbolic formation. Fuller does a lot about the speech. But this Yurugu is really digging into the thought processes behind the culture. And I don't know, I think it makes it even more, makes the problem even more well-defined. Makes it even more difficult. It shows how difficult the problem is. But it's a good question, Nana.
I think I may not understand. Can you reiterate your question, Nanaya? I don't know if I understand it completely.
Yeah, so my question was a little fumbled, but to reiterate it, I'm stumbling. The question was, so how do we today, because we're reading throughout this book that the Europeans cannot be humanistic. It's like not in their asili, so they cannot be humanistic. So it's up to like the non-white people who can be humanistic. It's like, how can we today like spread this or share this information and almost like to all non-white people in order to have a better environment, I guess. Because one of the things I'm thinking of as I'm asking this question is like all the wrongs in the world, like where it's environmental, people mistreatment, all of these things, because it has to do some sort of like humanistic touch. But if Europeans are running the world and they don't have a European or humanistic touch, obviously this will happen. So I'm thinking of how do we share amongst everyone, like, hey, they cannot do this, like they cannot be humanistic. So let's stop turning to these damn liberals and saying that they're thinking about us, because they're not, and take it upon ourselves to like make change, I guess, or if that makes sense. Is that more clear?
Yeah, that's more clear. I don't know if I have an answer, but I have to think about it.
I have an answer. Replace racism and white supremacy with justice.
Yeah. Silent Warrior, are you done, or is that
I think that's it. I mean, they're just like you said, Nana. They're not humanistic. They need to be more humanistic. But Europeans are running the world. They're running the world with racism and white supremacy. We can't even. That's the number one problem, and everything else seems to be unable to be solved unless you solve that.
Exactly. I would say.
But don't you think that is like a step to replacing racism, white supremacy with justice?
No, because I that's
no, I mean like
question.
you can't have racism, white supremacy. Like you can't replace it with justice if you're having people think the way that Nanaya is saying. So like you still have to kind of almost like answer the question in a way.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of it's still an abstract answer.
Yeah. I think I see what you're saying. In the clip that the book club posted, this 5-hour clip between Wells and Fuller and some others at their institute, they were talking about something that's like, how do we address this problem? And Fuller was saying like he wants a good question. He wants a good, very simple, very fast forwarded solution to end the system. Because the thing is, if you don't if you don't go straight to the heart of it, the system will spin you in a circle. So if it, for example, if you talk about humanism and humanity and being nice, like they've got well-practiced paths to take you down on. But if you talk to them and ask them, what is it that white people are afraid of in relation to the non-white people of the world, in 2 sentences? Like that was his, what he called a karate chop. And to get them to discuss, to get back to us on that. And then, because that has to happen so that the non-white people of the world will hear what the white people of the world say is their greatest fear. And if they are able to say, yeah, we don't want to be genetically annihilated, that's why we're doing, that's the biggest fear, that's our driving force. Once non-white people hear that, then we can start talking to them about how, we're being controlled by the system. But until, you have to go straight at the target. And humanism may not, talking about, you need to be more humanism, like they got hippies ready to take, they got hippies ready to, like that's what we heard on Wednesday when we're talking to this guy. I mean, he was like, he went out in the sun with his phone and had a nice walk while he literally led us down the lane. You see what? Isn't that what he did?
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I totally agree that his whole persona was this humanistic individual that does not exist. And my attempt to answer the question, I would suggest that the karate chop method. Our goal is not to be humane or whatever, because like that opportunity has been lost a very long time ago. So all we want is justice. We understand that justice currently does not exist, and I don't think we need to get non-white people to understand all the lies that white people are constantly creating. We just need non-white people to get in their heads that justice is deeply would be deeply better than what we currently have. So we need to like stop using so many words to describe what we want, because we only want justice. And if white people won't give us justice, then the collective of non-white people needs to begin to act on a code. Like white people have a code, they have a racist logic code, and as we're seeing, they act on this code no matter what. It's deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained in their asili and their tamawazo. So we need to begin to develop the same. We need to begin to just how they teach their children how to be racist. We need to teach our children how to be counter racist. We need this to be happening and affect the numbers, because I think you're correct. White people are not gonna be the ones to give us justice. They are gonna have to be forced to give us justice by us no longer participating in their programming, and they're training us to be against our well-being. We have to be the ones to take that initiative. And the whole, I think what will also help if I think what will also help is if we also I got thrown off track because of the many disruptions. I'll stop there.
Just 05, maybe this will help you go back on track. A quick question. So do you believe that in order to produce justice, wait, hold on. Let me rephrase my question. Do you believe that justice can be produced by not being humanistic?
Yes, because it's not about loving or liking anybody. It's about understanding that justice is what is needed. So and according to what it means to be human, to have color in one's skin, that is, white people can't do that. So we shouldn't even expect that from them. We should just expect them to understand that we're done being trained to be monsters and monstrosities. And that's what I mean by force them. So we have to bring them to a breaking point where they have to kill all of us or produce justice. We could
Nana, what's your definition for humanism? When you're saying that this is important, what's your definition that you're working with? Nana?
Oh, okay. So I wasn't sure if you were asking me. When I think of humanism, I'm just thinking of what Ani described as humanism.
No, what is your definition?
What is my definition?
Yeah, like right now, if you had to give one for humanism.
I would just think of human being in the forefront.
How about Fuller's definition of justice, balance between people? Does that fit in with humanism?
That does fit in with humanism, because humanism is also like, basically thinking of humans as like the base for everything almost. Like, okay, so if there's like a problem, you're going to solve it in order to make the humans like better. Not better, but like, I don't want to use the word comfortable either, but not mistreated.
Right.
So if there's a flood somewhere and they'll say like, oh, let's be humanitarian. Obviously it's different from what they do because they just don't do anything. But when I think of humanism or humanitarian or things like that sort, I think of the greater good for the human. So everything will be the greater good for of all humans on the planet. And it might be like either like just compensation of human needs too, because it's like human, you know.
And when you say that, you see all humans as inherently being human.
Right, like human.
Yeah. But as we see, when the European Asili and Utumaroho split some humans, they have themselves as the self, and they have all of the non-whites as the other. And then because then they become more and more, we become subhuman. So if we ask white people to be more humanistic and they think of us as subhuman because we're not European, then we're just asking them to continue practicing racism and white supremacy because they'll just continue to take care of the humans in their Asili, which is other Europeans.
I think
so I wouldn't use humanism because we have to be careful of how we're using the words. We're using their words and we're using their words and we're trained in their words and their concepts. Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm thinking of though, I wasn't talking about like going to white people and asking them, because you don't need to go to white people. I think it's more of the non-white people that I'm concerned about, because there's almost like this idea of like, okay, if you're the whole like woke, I'm gonna use that for an example. Like people say you're woke if you know, like say you know about racism, oh, you're woke. But I think it's going beyond that and helping people like really understand like what racism and white supremacy is, because we haven't even gotten there. So it's almost like people are just falling for the tricks of like liberal or like humanism, right? That keeps falling for the tricks of the white people. But if we teach the non-white people like the tricks, which I'm talking about with the Yurugu book, is I feel like will help the process of producing justice. Because it's like there's a misunderstanding in every area. But there's so many people who are literally leaning on a white person, probably grabbing their hand and saying, yeah, we're going to do this together, you know? And it's like, you could just see the marches on like all the liberals, just led by white people, but there's tons of non-white people who would even say I'm a liberal, you know? And I think like it's the confusion of like the non-white people that I'm more concerned about than white people. I'm not worried about white people. I have not worried, not saying nothing about them, but I'm thinking of like, how can we like talk to non-white people about like what it means, like about basically what I was trying to refer to in the book, what page, I think it was 450. about humanism, but I think like where it got lost in translation here in the discussion is where it's trying to focus on white people. But I'm not talking about white people, because I mentioned like white people, as in the book, mentioned that they can't even reach humanism or being humanistic, so they're already out the picture. But it's like us who are like non-white, who technically has to do this all on our own, because white people can't help us. But I'm just thinking about that and like the stance of like what it means, like humanistic means, but relating it to Yurugu, like I'm talking about the Yurugu.
I kind of want to attempt to answer the original question. It's been difficult to jump in. So I was talking to my mother earlier today, and it was a similar question came up, like what do you have to do, basically. And I talked about how being classified as a black person, a black male at that, is that you have to get the collective, or as many people as possible, to decide that they don't want to be human deer anymore. Like they don't want to just be someone who could just be easily murdered by agents of white supremacy, and then like basically, they have to come to a point where either they understand that that's happening every single day, that there's a war being waged against them, and the war is called racism, white supremacy. Once they get to that point, a decision has to be made. Leave Europe and leave Western countries and go to Africa and attempt to build some type of united country and deal with the, try to help them with the Christian brainwashing and the Western brainwashing, or get a gun and go out and murk as many white people as possible before you are eliminated. That's what could lead to something happening along the lines of justice being brought to the planet, because right now people aren't serious, and black people, those that have been classified as black, are not taken seriously. I think it's interesting that black people could be murdered every single day, and Africa as a nation hasn't really commented on it. I wonder if that would be the case if Chinese people were getting murdered by race soldiers every day, if China will just be quiet and allow that. But we don't know. We don't know, because black people are at the bottom of the barrel at the moment. But I guess people getting serious about being killed. Black males and black females deciding that they don't want to be human deer. Walking targets, expendable beings. Because this whole concept of humanism just means that black people are not humans. They are, they are subhuman. Someone already said it, but below human. They are savage. And if they don't conform to be like me, if they're not acting like me, they're not trying to be a white person, then kill them, get rid of them. That's white supremacy. It's very simple. Those who do not conform, just get rid of them, kill them. But yeah. To my attempt.
I don't think there's an Africa. There's no African countries. There's no black leaders. And I have a friendship with someone who is behind like Cameroon's fight for independence, and he maintains that the main problem is France. We can be friends with America, but we got to get our country, Cameroon, back. I'm telling him, you ain't got no country. None of us do. There's no Jamaica. It's important to replace racism, white supremacy with justice, and then after that we can get a country going. But at the moment, I don't really consider there to be any non-white countries. If you can't do with a non-white country what the white people can do with theirs, so you don't really have a country. No.
Yeah, countries are only concepts while we are currently in this system of racism, white supremacy. I'm gonna read some
Can
stuff.
I answer the question? I feel like it's been hard to interject, like Sert was saying.
But yes.
I wanted to answer too. I think what Nanaya was saying is more like a practical thing, and I was thinking like maybe you can just like how I guess Neely Fuller talks about people are going to talk to you about their problems. And in the conversation about talking to people about their problems, whether it be like, oh, I don't know, like childcare or something. And you can be like, well, what in, your ideal, or not even your ideal, but what do you think is the most efficient and logical way for you to have childcare so you can like go to work or something? And like, try to expand their minds with these questions so that it's not just like something that has to do with a white person being benevolent and giving them something, but like has to do with like, building something with the people around them. And I think that that would kind of help to lead them into an understanding of a more African-centered structuring of like how you would just like structure your society, or how you would structure your thought process. So you're not thinking about getting help from someone or like an abstract humanism. You're thinking about like concrete, humane behaviors, like she talks about, that people in your life can do and you can reciprocate. I don't know if that helps, but that's what I was thinking.
I hope that answers the question. So on 543, the book states, within the logic of European humanism, one can talk about morality that is not reflected in behavior. One is considered to be highly moral if the language that one uses is couched in a syntax of abstraction and universality. That is of disinterest. This makes no sense in other cultures where morality is concerned with behavior only and is meaningless unless it is indicative of a behavioral norm, which is more human, the way of life that dictates respectful behavior or the one that attempts to encourage an abstract affection for humanity at large, which has no relationship to behavior and to which the individual cannot relate. The answer lies in part in a comparison of behavior towards unrelated peoples. It is European exploitation and aggressive behavior towards others that is consistent with abstraction as a normative goal. It has been to the detriment of other peoples that their conceptions have not allowed them to act with as intense and sustained hostility as Europeans have. It is their very humanity that has obstructed their political vision. Via double-think, Africans became xenophobic and Europeans xenophilic. So through this double speak, through these words, something that reminds me of what Trey mentioned, like Africans, black people are at the bottom of the barrel because Europeans, white people have used their so-called humanitarianism, their so-called what else is this word? Their morality to create this system of white supremacy, this society that we all live in. They have used this to totally paint non-white people, especially black people, as the ones who are actually like so-called backwards, the ones who are afraid to so-called progress. But in actuality, non-white people in general have been the ones to function somewhat humanely, minus the conflicts that were occurring amongst themselves before white domination began. So we have to understand that this morality that white people paint themselves as has to be unveiled. We have to truly see the enemy as what the enemy is, which is I would just describe as a some sort of psychopathic monster, and we need to communicate this to non-white people as efficiently as we possibly can, probably by staying in the question lane, probably by attempting to get non-white people to really just look at the evidence, just really get them to look at history, like who were the ones to create the weapons that destroy populations, destroy villages, and destroy people? Who are the ones to allow these weapons to be used? And then it's always going to be white people. There's no such thing as a white person with so-called, well, I suspect there to be no white person with so-called morality, because they're all complicit in this war that is being waged against non-white people. And they have also painted themselves as like lovers of the planet, like, yeah, we love everyone, but there's no evidence. Like, if you really look at history, you really study logic and what has actually happened, you would see that there's no way for a correct thinking individual to truly believe without immense brain trashing that white people possess any love for themselves or for creatures or other peoples. So I think it's really important to understand that. And currently, there's no place, like, I don't, the African Union, so-called African Union, is not going to be the ones to produce justice. Going back to so-called Africa, it's not going to be how we produce justice. It's just going to be those who are able to receive the truth, those who are able to receive the truth and affect the numbers, who are able to lead by example by becoming correct thinking, correct behavior individuals. This is how we're gonna solve the problem. I suspect I may be totally in error, but this is where my logic is taking me. Anyone like to share share from the text, comment?
Thank you for like reading that part of the chapter. Rereading that sentence in particular. So yeah, rereading that sentence in particular, let me just reread it. Which is the more human, the way of life that dictates respectful behavior, or the one that attempts to encourage an abstract affection for humanity at large, which has no relationship to the behavior to which the individual cannot relate? For me, like, she hasn't answered that it states there after, but the thoughts that came to my head, the way that the European society has like molded our mentality now when a disaster happens around the world, like it's a moralistic and human, like you've achieved your humanistic goals if you have reposted it or changed your image or color to match that version of solidarity, rather than actually having some actual real respect or involvement, like European and the European version of humanism. First, in removing spirituality, when you say humanism, it's respect for nature, respect for literally everything that breathes in and out. Grass, everything has a rhythm and a breath, and it's in respect. It's respecting breath and respecting that, as opposed to respecting humans only. That's the first problem with humanism as a concept, because it allows, when removing that, when it's despiritualized, it allows this idea of us to be able to rationalize scientifically what is human versus subhuman, giving us a context in their own logic mind that it's lawful in their eyes to be able to do what they do, therefore making it moral, because it's based in this falsified logic that changes with any anthropologists or archaeologists that they believe is forerunning this biological explanation, which is really why I like reading and understanding it within this academic context, because it allows me to understand the things that we're seeing in happen in society in such an intricate way, and be able to stop it at the forefront. And just like earlier, Nanaya and Ashley both touched on the commentary of Anne Sanori commented on what that question on what does humanism mean to you, like what is its actual definition, and in us just being more codified and being more vocal in our perspectives, and understanding, like becoming now the front runners, as opposed to listening to society's new versions, or their new version of like washed out old ideologies, like branded as I don't know, tokenism, or these very minute ways of intersectionalizing our pains and frustrations, and actually being the forerunners and on these perspectives and redefining humanism to what is humanism, like literally making an echo of it being a lifestyle as opposed to definitions to live, definitions to sprout out or to silence people with in sentences like calling people homophobic or saying that they're being trans, whatever. I don't know, but yeah.
I really like your point about it being like a lifestyle instead of concrete actions. I think that's so interesting because I'm listening to this audiobook. It's about how like in society everything turns into like an image and people are not interested in actually being something. They're just interested in being the image of something. And I think that whole like humanism is a perfect example of that because it's an idea, a lifestyle, an image, but it doesn't actually like benefit the whole of humanity. It almost just is like self-serving for the ego or for like, I guess the white consciousness's ego. So I thought that was like, I don't know, I just really like that point about humanism. It's like the person who, like we talked about it before, like the humanitarian white person who goes to some place and you see all of these Black children around them, and those Black people or children are not being benefited in any way. It's that type of humanism that is only benefiting that person's image. I think that's interesting. I also wanted to read from 543 when she says, the answer lies in part in a comparison of behavior toward unrelated peoples. It is European exploitation and aggressive behavior towards others that is consistent with abstraction as a normative goal. It has been to the detriment of other peoples that their conceptions have not allowed them to act with as intense and sustained hostility as Europeans have. It is their very humanity that has obstructed their political vision. And I thought that part was so good because in the Haitian Revolution, there's a part in this book where they talk about the Haitian Revolution, and people actually got mad at the author or saying that he should have said it was incorrect how the Black enslaved people like treated the white slave owners as if like and it's this idea that like the people who are considered subhuman, the people who are oppressed, have to have this sort of humanity that no one else in the society has to have. I thought that was really interesting, and it reminded me of like, I know we talk about like Black Lives Matter a lot. It reminded me of that. It's like when at the face of like police killing or like, you know, police are killing Black people, and what are like the collective responses that Black people are doing? It's our lives matter. It's like, what does that mean? Right? Like it's an abstraction, so it's us like projecting an abstraction that we've learned from the European asili, and two, like it's an appeal to humanity when like someone is like has obviously just killed that person. They don't see them as humane, right? And instead of like facing that hostility of like a cop killing or a white person killing a Black person, with the like facing that hostility with our own hostility in a different way, obviously we just try to like face it with this abstract humanity. So yeah, I don't know, that's all I wanted to say.
I thought that was a good point because when this was being read, I was thinking about religion and like the responses that we usually have are kind of like what Christianity says to do, you know, just kind of suffer in silence, and once you die, all will be, you know, forgiven, and you'll live in an eternal life. So it's like when we are experiencing these things, we have that kind of slave mentality that's taught to us through Christianity to kind of suffer through it. You always need to be a good person. There's that quote in the Bible, I believe, where it's you know, you should never hate your master or something like that. That's something that I was thinking about. And again, like this part in particular reminds me about religion, because I've come to realize, I don't know if it was stated in this book earlier on, but religion at one point was a way of life. It's something that you do every day, something that you practice every day, not just like on Sundays. So when she says, which is more human, the way of life that dictates respectful behavior, or the one that attempts to encourage an abstract affection for humanity at large, I see with Christianity and most religions in general, it's like about an abstract feeling or abstract way of life, right? We see a lot of people saying they're Christian, but they don't actually follow the things, and that's not their way of life, though. It's only something that they do on Sunday. They don't live like a Christian. They don't live like they don't follow the religion that they say they follow, which is important. Which reminds me about what Neely Fuller says about regarding religion, that if they say that they are this religion, then that's something that they should be doing all the time, right? That's what was coming to mind on this part. And then the part that you read off, Ash, which says the answer lies in part in a comparison of behavior toward unrelated peoples. It is European exploitation and aggressive behavior towards others. I never really thought about that. That usually this abstraction is usually projected at other world peoples, but when thinking about religion and Christianity specifically, it makes total sense that is usually what is being projected at us, because like O5 said, these weapons that are being produced, the weapons that are being produced, and all the other actions, they don't really follow that abstract affection for humanity at large. Because if you're talking about love of humanity, why are you creating weapons of mass destruction? Why are you creating nuclear bombs? Why are you creating these diseases? So that's just something that that came to mind when I was thinking about.
Just like when we look at the system, it all seems so like just simple that the enemies, the people we should be suspicious of, are the ones who, like you just said, are the ones who are making weapons that could potentially destroy the planet. But we have been just menticide to such a degree that it just floats right over our heads, tragically. I really I don't know if this Winnebago person is white. I suspect this person to be white because of the nonsense that I read from the quote. But I think it's really interesting. The last sentence in this quote, this person states, "It is wicked to love your enemy while he is your enemy." And then I reflect on 2021, how non-white people have been trained to have a deep attachment, affection to white people. We really have been trained to worship white people, and the white people have long ago declared non-white people to be their enemies. So we have been trained to love our abuser, our decimators, and it's very tragic. But I don't think this author ever suspected non-white people to decode her text in the way that Ani has done. But the Bible does say, "Love thy neighbor," and maybe love thy neighbor, which we also shouldn't do. We should really just be concerned with producing justice. But just the reality, 2021, Black people particularly love and worship and still trust white people after centuries of abuse, misuse, and mistreatment from white people are just really tragic. And really incorrect. Really incorrect.
Yeah, it's almost more accurate to say we've been trained to look for the humanity in our oppressors, like Ash said about BLM. Like the reaction is, oh, our lives matter. You know, hoping that they start to care about our lives, when many times throughout history, evidence has shown that they do not care about our lives. So constantly trying to look for the humanity in white people, black people still don't get it.
Barbara Sizemore. Black people just don't get it.
Yeah, you know, yeah. I see the definition for humanism on page 550, and it seems to be speaking about the recognition of spirit in humans. That's something that's you ain't gonna find in this world. In the Western world, we don't think of spirituality, and even those black people that are here, and we're not white people, and but we're not connected to spirit. We don't have the spiritual practices or that we should have or that we used to have. We don't have that um, so much anymore. So I'm not sure. I'm not at the point. I'm not convinced of. I'm not convinced of using the functionality. I'm not convinced of the value of using the word humanism. And again, I reiterate that if just like the person before me said, if we say Black Lives Matter, like I think when we say that, you're actually telling if we are saying that to white people with this Asili and this Utamaroho, I mean, even if you just put Wilson aside, you're saying Black Lives Matter, that's not going to compute. That's not going to make any sense, because the only lives that matter are white lives. And the further you get from white, the more you become the other. So it's again, you can't appeal to, I don't think what Annie is saying here, it's like it's impossible to appeal to them when they have created this, where they have this Asili and this Utamaroho. But if I liked the discussion about how to help other non-white people if they have a problem, and you guide them from using their words until you guide them towards a solution, and you gradually use words to help them improve their understanding of their environment and the system that they're under. But you have to be patient, really patient.
On the Black Lives Matter, I totally agree with that. I've come to realize that saying Black Lives Matter, that's more for Black people to believe than it is for white people to believe. You know, we constantly have to tell ourselves that our lives matter too. We have to constantly be convincing ourselves, because evidence shows that clearly our lives do not matter, because when you go anywhere in the world, Black people are suffering and dying. And it really is the fact that our lives do not matter, not one bit. Black lives are very expendable. And, you see that by the shootings, you see that by the places in the world where Black people are living, that when a Black person gets shot, their life is so expendable that nothing happens. That that these race soldiers don't lose their jobs, they don't lose their pension, that nothing happens to them. They just get a slap on the wrist. That's how expendable a Black life is. So really saying Black Lives Matter, I think that's more for Black people than anybody else.
Yeah, and to contextualize this reality even further, we think it's just if many people are satisfied. Okay, this race soldier murdered this black person. Okay, when that race soldier is fired or loses their position, or is sometimes even put in jail, we see that as being just and correct, and we're satisfied with a race soldier losing their job after killing a black male or black female. But according to counter-racist logic, if you kill someone, you should be also willing to die. So every race soldier who has killed a black person, they should be dead according to logic that came with the universe. So the training we have received has taken us so far away from logic, so far away from what this society should be, that if I were to say this in a room full of people, I would seem like the one who is mad. But it's just, I'm just following the logic. Don't kill people if you're not willing to die. Don't sign up for a so-called job that allows you to kill people if you're not willing to, when you kill someone, also die. You kill someone unjustly. But this is the current 2021 situation we're in. White people can kill us, get away with it, and not only that, make more money from doing so. Case in point, George Zimmerman, many others. I forget the one who killed Michael Brown, but he's also
Darren Wilson.
I forget. He's also potentially a millionaire now by telling his story and how he was able to kill black demons, black beasts. His words. So I think.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree with you. I had this thought not too long ago, and I was thinking execution would be like the best form of a solution in terms of an immediate way for people to stop taking people's lives, because the European Asili and Ultima Rosso has now functioned in a way that we've allowed it to get to a point in society where it's functioning in a way that those were tests. I believe the first, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, that's when it started getting further into like the media stream and limelight, and everybody globally started to be more consciously aware of what has been going on for ages. But it is the one of the last spikes, that one of the first like major spikes that made people start thinking collectively and consciously together. And what for me that was showing me was like, these are messages. They were all tests and trials, and it's like we're constantly being experimented with to see how complacent we are. And Black Lives Matter is the most complacent group ever, which is why it is allowed to be so vocal, saying absolutely nothing and dancing around topics and literally asking to matter, when this is like, why are we not demanding things like respect Black lives? Why are we not actually demanding real things? We're just shouting a statement or an affirmation that's not really energetically doing anything to us if we were thinking spiritually about what we're saying. And for me, I believe that's the only reason why Black Lives Matter is in a position that they're in right now, because they're complacent and, in my opinion, what's the word? Demobilized, compromised. They're compromised. If they weren't compromised, why hasn't there been any kind of thoughts towards policy changing, or people working with people in the government, or policies around protections? That we hear about so-and-so's law, Alice's law, Lucy's law for children or people in certain states who are murdered or killed unwillingly. Where's Breonna Taylor's law? Because instead we hear more about, it's made more of a celebrity thing, and it's like capitalism is like, has now through the European Asili allowed these people, these murderers, to be given money, and generational wealth comes to them from these acts, and it's literally telling them to continue to do it. The matrix and system that's been put in place by the Asili is now encouraging this behavior from them. So we need to establish a counter by putting the policies in place that make police officers have to take a psychological test whether or not you're fit to be working in a certain area or environment based on your implicit and explicit beliefs and patterns of thoughts around race. You shouldn't be able to work in a demographic that is of a particular race that you have no connection to or don't want any connection to or have strong biases against it. These are the kind of things that in a everyday, because we cannot separate, if we're not choosing to separate immediately and rejoin the African diaspora and Pan-African and reestablish some form of our own time and space, and just remove it from European and Western civilization completely and try and integrate it with the African unions. But the issue with that is the time that it's going to take. So the immediacy of the way to take ourselves seriously, I believe, is literally to get involved in the policies. And that's how I know Black Lives Matter ain't doing nothing for us, because none of these is any of their involvement. It's just making noise and making pretty videos and memes on Insta stories.
I would like to add on to what Kwaku was saying. I don't even think that Black people are like expendable. I would say like Black, I guess, death / suffering / exploitation is like a necessity of how the system like functions. So it's not necessarily that like Black lives are like expendable. It's more like the system cannot like exist without the constant churning of like Black people like dying, being exploited, suffering. You can see that in like the healthcare system can't function without all these Black people who have like diabetes and cancers because of the food industry that they eat. You know, it all like feeds into each other. And to add on to Mary's point about how it's like almost like a test, like that's actually like I completely agree with that. Like how when Philando Castile died or was killed by the police, like a lot of times it's white neighborhoods and they don't want Black people encroaching on that space, and him being killed was like a sign by the police to those white people that we will kill these people, we will kill these Black people if they come into these areas. And that's why like after he died, the housing prices, or after he was killed, the housing prices went up, right? Because everyone in that neighborhood got the signal, everyone, the banks got the signals, you know what I mean? Like it's all a collective sign of like the police are just like how they say police are race soldiers, and they're just showing like, yeah, we're willing to do this to keep white existence out how it is.
Well said. I think that's a great segue into reading this part from 547. And I agree. System of white supremacy needs Black death, Black suffering 24/7. And I love what Quaking said in chat. Instead of BLM maybe introducing Black people to the code or introducing the Black people to getting serious about serious things like producing justice, they're having videos of Black females twerking at the Washington Monument. Totally incorrect and totally stupid behavior. But I'm going to read from 547. It says, the abstract concept of the good person is consistent with the European Atamawazo. He is the universal man, and that he is committed to the welfare of all and identifies with no particular group of people. He is not parochial, he is international. He is not motivated by limiting and constraining emotional attachment. Therefore, he is liberated through reason and intellect so that he can identify with the universal suffering of men. That's in quotations. He doesn't love people, he loves humanity, also in quotations. He does what he does out of commitment to abstract ideas. He has risen above nationalism. He is internationalist. This is the syntax of the European rhetorical ethic, but Europeans resemble this description than no more than do majority peoples. The successful promulgation of the European empire is in fact due to the intensity of their nationalistic or particularistic commitment. and to the uniquely inhumane definition of their national cause. So, what I understand from this is that the European has done a masterful job, not only for painting themselves as every single label that was just mentioned. They have convinced the majority non-white people that they are capable of controlling the world for the better, and they have good intentions. But currently on planet Earth 2021, there's no good person, white or non-white, because we have all been forced in such pitiful states. White people are pathetic because they need the system to exist, apparently, and non-white people are pitiful because we cannot get out of this system. So we have just been bamboozled. The European is a just a master with words, and I would suggest that the European is very emotional, and we see that and how the system is full of chaos. I would suspect if white people were like calm in nature, if they were able to be still with nature, then they want a system that necessitates 24/7 chaos, 24/7 noise being produced. So we are dealing with a really anxious uh, entity that feels immense anxiety when they lose any amount of control, whether it's control of the conversation or control on the battlefield. So really interesting, and they will always be nationalistic, which is code for maintaining white power and white domination. They will always attempt to be humanitarians, which is code for controlling all non-white people across the planet. And they will always be internationalists, which means having the right to go into non-white people's land and dictate how they're going to live and take all of their resources. So very important to be able to decode all these labels and all the tools that the European has been using against us for quite some time. Any more comments from the text?
Yeah, it sounds like the Wizard of Oz, this universal man.
Yeah, I'm just gonna further my notes from
Oh,
five.
can I go? I have something.
All right.
Wait. Or I can go after you. I do.
You could go.
Okay. On 545, she says the same concern as that of the U.S. government and the international business community. How is this access to be assured? Again, we are asked to believe that all of these concerns are based on the commitment to untrammeled scholarly inquiry and the desire to understand human nature. The concrete results and relationships of this inquiry to European government and capitalist interests lead us to believe that the commitment has been to something much more immediate and closer to home. And later on, she quotes someone who says, ultimately, it was hoped to establish a computer-based model that would permit the rapid prediction of various types of outcomes of social change and conflict situations and the assessment of the effectiveness of different action programs in resolving or averting conflicts. I thought that part was really interesting. She was talking about how like they kind of have this guise where they say that they're using research or technology to kind of for like the greater good and for scholarly inquiry to understand human nature, but really it's just like obviously to control anything that, you know, like she says, to control like revolutionary movements or anything that would just like upend the system. And I thought that part was really interesting. It reminded me of like Apple kind of, and or like data in general, and like Steve Jobs and this idea of like collecting all of your data and all of this technology is supposed to like make a more defined you, right? It's supposed to project this image of the person that you want to be. It's supposed to like, that's how they sell it as, right? Like you're able to like as a consumer, you're able to show who you are by what you buy. But really, it's like they're just tracking all of your information. They're putting thoughts in your head. They're putting things that you want to buy into your head. And it's all just a front, but it's under the guise of this idea of like appealing to your individuality, your humanness, etc. So I just thought that that was really interesting. And I thought it was just really crazy that she can easily, like Dr. Ani can easily see through this person's writing, and it's like totally a sign of what, like in the past, what this is like 30 years ago, of how things are today in terms of the massive like infrastructure of just surveillance, and how you don't even know if things is like written, you don't even know if articles are written by like an AI or an actual person. I just thought it was like really interesting.
Well said. Interesting and very, very tragic how we have been treated and are continuing to be treated under this system. From 549, it states the most liberal and progressive Europeans take the position that they are best qualified to lead the rest of us in our war against their people. Of course, enemies become necessarily abstracted as forces and not cultural beings in order to support their position of continued superiority as our leaders. But Europeans are at least able to universalize authentically since their worldview is myopic, while the African worldview is more generally universal, and that it is global, holistic, and synthetic. But we have no need to speak for everyone. Ross Sachs said, has this to say: Marx failed to see that once having endorsed the fundamental values of industrialism, his socialist alternative might have no choice but to let its dynamic capitalist competitive pace along the course of history. The two centers may enter different banners, but they are in the same race. It becomes somewhat difficult to tell them apart. And I interpret this as um freaking if the ideology comes from a white person, it cannot be an ideology that can successfully um, solve the problem, because they're the European is silly. It is within every single European. So how can they how can something be born out of that silly that is used to that can be used to replace the system of justice? Is I think is literally impossible. And just because like the author, he's saying race as like people running against each other, but I say that they have to coexist because they are part of the same race, being the white race, the only race on planet Earth. So it's really interesting how we can decode what they're saying and decode their double speak, because I this could be another example of double speak. And it's mentioned later how Karl Marx ideology became an ism, and how many white ideologies become isms because that is what they do. They like to create many isms to further the divide and conquer, and also at the same time to further the confusion of the non-white people. That was very, very interesting. And it's really tragic to see 2021 how people, many non-white people see communism or Marxism as a way out of the system, as a way to solve the problem, which is which is literally impossible. Can never happen. What we need is quite a simple system, a system of justice, guaranteeing no one is allowed to be mistreated, and those who need help receive constructive help. It's literally could be so simple. And white people definitely have the power to do this, but they don't have the will. And the very few people who have the will do not have the power. Thus, the production of justice is thwarted until we can gather that effective number of people.
Yeah, I thought that that part was a very. I honestly laughed when you read that first part about the liberals feeling that they're most qualified to lead us against their people. I clearly see that with the whole political landscape in America, and how the Republicans I mean, the liberals tend to treat the Republicans like they're the masters of racism. They create racism. If you join us, we can band together to actually stop them. That's never the case, and I think that really comes from what she mentioned earlier in this chapter or in the book about Europeans never analyzing themselves and analyzing their behaviors. I thought that was pretty funny. Also, I wanted to read on 548 about the transubstantive errors. So I just, which is the second paragraph, I've come to understand that if I could sum up what a transubstantive error is basically misinterpreting somebody else's culture or reason for what they do. And where she says Europeans are not the only ones who make transubstantive errors, although they may be the only ones who make them intentionally. We Africans and other primary well, first I want to talk about that first sentence where she says they make them intentionally. So she's saying Europeans intentionally choose not to understand what Africans are saying or the African worldview is about. They intentionally continue to actively go against that worldview, even though they know exactly what it is and what it's about. And then she says, we Africans and other primary peoples also make such errors when we trust Europeans and treat them as family, in quotation marks, taking them at their word. The concept of asili has been created to prevent us from making these mistakes. Using it, we can interpret European culture in terms of its own nature. I thought that last part was so good because when you really start to understand that this is their asili, that this is just their whole life force, their Tamaroho. When you start to understand that, you don't make the mistake of trying to appeal to their humanity, using phrases like Black Lives Matter. Rather, I believe you start to adopt things like the code and things that help you defend yourself from that asili, from being subject to that asili. So, that sentence right there kind of summed up almost the whole reason, she came up with the concept of asili. At least that makes me understand why it's important to understand the European asili.
Well said. And I totally agree. It's very useful to have the Asili, Tamawazo, and Tamaroho to describe exactly how the European has been operating on this place known as planet Earth.
Yeah, I wanted to add too. It also goes back to kind of like Dr. Frances Cress Welsing when she uses the analogy of being on a chessboard. You just have to understand your opponent, and you have to understand it's it's a part of the game, almost like how Neely Fuller says, just business. That you can't interact with these people how you would interact with people within your culture. It just doesn't work. It doesn't compute with them. Like how we said earlier, black, like how Silent Warrior said earlier, telling white people that Black Lives Matter just doesn't compute, you know.
Agreed. Now I like this part from 550. It's at the bottom. It says, "Assili allows us to link apparently benevolent, in quotations, European behavior with obviously destructive European behavior, and further to understand how the humanistic, in quotations, posture becomes a debilitating ideological weapon, complementing the overtly aggressive and violent behavior discussed in Chapter 8. In one instance, the weapons are visible, tangible, and physically destructive. In another, they are difficult to discern, subtle, and spiritually and ideologically destructive." So this is really important to understand that we have, well, 2021, we all have just been like uh I want to say just destroyed. Like our spirituality is kind of non-existent unless trying to produce justice is a spiritual task. But the weapons, like, "No weapon formed against me shall prosper" quote is totally inaccurate and nonsense talk, because the Europeans have long been using weapons of mass destruction, whether it's a Bible, whether it's a chain to imprison people, or whether it's a gun. They have many weapons, and they have been using them very strategically for a very long time. And we must understand that racism is not just a Black person being killed by a race soldier. Racism is not just being called nigger, but it's a freaking religion backed by thought, speech, and action. And the majority of white people on planet Earth believe in this religion or practice this religion. Um, very important to understand that.
Can I say something real quick? One thing that really comes across from what I'm reading in Yurugu is like, as we exist in this system, we're trained to maintain it, and we have to interrogate ourselves and investigate ourselves. To make sure that to understand how we've been made into monstrosities that uphold the system with the way that we think, the values that we hold. I, for one, like to think that it's good to not let my emotions get too involved, or not to have a strong negative emotional response in many cases. But now I wonder what's the role? What should be the role for emotions? What should be the role for spirit? Like,
I would just say what someone, I think what someone just mentioned. It's nothing personal, just business. We're in the business of producing justice and telling the truth, no matter whose feelings or emotions are hurt. And white people are in the business of continuing their white lifestyle, which is racism, white supremacy. So, me personally, although I may be interpreted to be angry or upset in my tone or what I'm saying, I don't think this personal. I understand this is just business. Nothing personal at all. It's personal from the white side because they hate their skin and they hate their inadequacies potentially, but um, I don't get upset when I see another Black person being killed or murdered. I understand that is necessary, and I understand that it will continue happening until the non-white people are really serious about producing justice to put an end to that sort of thing. If anyone else would care to shed some light.
What was the question?
Silent word. Was that a question or just a statement?
It was. I'm sorry. It was just a statement. Like, you know, just a statement.
Yeah. So I want to. I'm just gonna comment on this. Merlin Stone. I think she in her discussion. I think it's in her discussion of 3,000 years of racism. She's a white woman who was able to write about racism, white supremacy, and paint herself as one of the good guys, and while at the same time keeping black people as nameless, unimportant people. And she does this by mentioning the accomplishments and the fact that black people created civilization first, and she does that by she says this by vaguely mentioning it. You know, she says that the darker peoples of the world first created civilization, something along those lines. But she doesn't say African. She doesn't say people from Africa. She literally just says darker peoples. So this is how they're able to practice racism, even while so-called shedding light on the system of racism, white supremacy. And it's just really interesting how this double speak is so embedded in the whether it's intentional or not. It doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned. What matters is that it's happening and it needs to stop.
Hey, Merlin Stone, isn't she the author of When God Was a Woman?
I have no clue.
I believe she's the author of When God Was a Woman, where she speaks about before patriarchy, the the most divine was female. Um, yeah, she talks about the Venus figure. Oh, and I read a little bit of that book, and in that book, she mainly speaks of Europe. Like, I mean, you don't see or hear that much of her talking about matriarchy in Africa, or that these religions have their genesis in Africa. So I'm not surprised to find her here in Yurugu doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Sounds a lot like white fragility.
Has anyone else read White Fragility? Has anyone read the White Fragility yet?
Nope, I haven't read it. I bought the book, but I didn't read it. Have you read it?
I read like the first chapter or so, but I figured that, you know, I'm in the Facebook group already, so that I'd rather spend my reading time on these books that I haven't read completed yet, like Yurugu or Delectable Negro. Like I need to read those books first than to read some silliness. I really wanted to read Yurugu especially because I feel like it would give me tools at the level of ISIS papers, and I can see that it does.
Agreed. Very, very useful book, which is why it's becoming harder to find, I suspect. My final notes is really, really, really constructive information because if we will always be asked, oh, so what are you gonna do about it? You know, what do we do against this racism thing? It's just like, what can we do? You will hear this from many victims who are doing absolutely nothing to help solve the problem. But I think Dr. Marimba Ani does a great job at giving us what we can do, and that is found on 552, where it says the European claim to universalism is a formidable weapon, and victims of European aggression can successfully combat it if we proceed as follows. One, refuse to accept universality as either humanely possible or desirable. Two, critically assess all universalistic concepts, including monotheism, scientific objectivity, progressivism, abstract humanism, and reject them when they are found to represent European values only and to conflict with conceptualizations based on our own ideologies. Three, accept nationalism, that is cultural commitment, as potentially positive, liberating, and constructive impression of human energy, depending on specific content and definition that is given. So number three, I would just like to put a codified spin on that. The global collective of non-white people understanding that we are all victims of racism, white supremacy, and we need to use that label, use that our position on this planet to work to produce justice by becoming codified and understanding what it means to be a victim. A victim of racism, white supremacy should not be concerned with silly things and should only be concerned with serious things such as producing justice or helping others to complete constructive tasks. That's all my notes. If you get any closing comments and no one has anything further to share.
I just wanted to comment on those last 3 points. I absolutely think that these are necessary to do. Refuse to accept universality. I think that one is very important, and a lot of people have a hard time grasping that just because of how we've been trained to be monsters and monstrosities, and they are sometimes our religious trainings, because we've been taught so much that we need to fight for all of humanity. We need to do what's best for humanity. Just think about like the vaccines. Doesn't matter if you don't want to do it or take it. Doesn't matter the history that the medical industrial complex has had with Black people. Doesn't matter. You need to take that vaccine because that is what I hear a lot of people saying is my duty as a human. So I think understanding that universality, or this idea that that we should all be able to understand one another, that we should all be able to relate to one another, should be refused because it's not possible. And I mean, a lot of people can't even get along with the people in their families, and there's nothing wrong with that. People have differences, but let's not go around and kid ourselves and act like, oh, well, one day we can, or I'm supposed to just like that about you, or all those other things. And then I just feel that these things are absolutely necessary, but so oftentimes people want like tangibles. Like they need you to do, they need you, I don't want to say do something, but like they want you to start up an organization or something based around these ideals in order to say that you're doing something. That's often the thing that I run into when specifically talking about like practicing code, and really how that helps to replace the system of white supremacy, racism with a system of justice, is that people have a hard time thinking that if they just change things about themselves individually, it has a great effect on the system. So I mean, that's one thing that's the only thing that I could think of that I would struggle with when telling people to do this stuff, is people always want tangibles. But I think that this stuff is definitely this kind of practice definitely goes a long way in replacing the system with justice.
Yeah, and a good rebuttal to the so-called starting up an organization, that's Fort Wallism. That doesn't work. that organization can be destroyed, infiltrated, or many other things can happen to that organization. So united, independent is the approach. We don't need a bunch of black people like a part of any organization. We just need all non-white people, especially black people, on code and understanding the problem. I may be incorrect though.
You are correct. There's also one thing that I wanted to bring up regarding BLM, just because we brought it up. It's a comment if anybody wants to like speak on it, but I recently started to notice a lot of like media kind of vilifying BLM more than I have in the past. I mean, I'm talking about like popular media, because for a very long time I felt BLM was untouchable. You couldn't really speak negatively about them. But I see recently, especially with one of the founders buying these homes, they're really making a big deal about this. I mean, I'm seeing it on some like the New York Post and whatnot. So I feel that racism once again is refining itself. I wouldn't be surprised within a couple weeks, couple months maybe, we start seeing the overall downfall of BLM, being discredited and whatnot. I'm seeing that a lot with these activists, being Tamika Mallory. I don't know if she's a part of BLM or whatnot, but I definitely see a lot of people speaking on it and speaking mostly in a negative fashion about them. I've always felt negative about them. I've always felt that they're not really taking the right approach. But seeing it on like starting to see it on a national scale, I think the system's refining itself, and BLM's not gonna be around for that much longer.
And that's also out of the white supremacist playbook. They love to build up people or orgs just to tear them down or watch them get torn down by other white supremacists. So that's really out of their playbook. So this is why another reason why four-wallism doesn't work. They have a whole history of building up certain black people just to tear them down, building up whatever they're building up just to watch it burn. This is how they enjoy themselves. One of the many ways they enjoy themselves in the form of mistreatment.
Because they're victims. They're victims of racism. Black Lives Matter is a white supremacist organization. It was funded by white supremacists. It was given direction by white supremacists, and white supremacists chose its representatives that would appear as the leaders. I mean, there's an article about Warren, I'll put it in the Discord, about how Warren Buffett is likely the wallet behind Black Lives Matter, or Warren Buffett's son. Yeah, and I mean, how much different is it from NAACP 100 years ago?
Yeah, very, very true. I've also heard this guy, George Soros. He's also a huge funder of Black Lives Matter. So, yeah. I guess my closing question would be, how do we get Black people to abandon universalism for nationalism?
I would hope the truth and logic and them learning to connect the dots themselves will be all that one needs, but maybe totally incorrect and giving victims maybe incorrect and expecting too much from victims of white supremacy to be able to do that, to use logic, follow logic, and see for themselves what's happening.
I think I agree with Dr. Annie's analysis about rejecting universality and all of its concepts. But I disagree that nationalism is a solution. Because as it stands right now, Black Lives Matter, that statement that many Black people are rallying behind seems to be somewhat nationalistic. I mean, like, we had Pan-Africanism, we have quote unquote African nations. I mean, I don't think nationalism in itself is a solution either, but I'm definitely with it when it comes to, I mean, the most important thing to do is like focus on the white people practicing racism, like focus on them, target them. That's the strategy. Target white supremacists, understand them and interrogate them. Once you got them, everything else will fall into place. Any other strategy can be used, but like that's the target. We need to get that karate chop, as Fuller was saying today. I'm not so big on nationalism because then you're just going to put a bunch of victims that don't like themselves together with each other that may not understand the white supremacists and the system of white supremacy. So I'm all about like target the white supremacists. And the value I get from Yurugu is being able to assess these concepts, this thought, and culture of the system of white supremacy that is looking at. But I'm not so big on this solution of first, except nationalism. No, I'm down with United Independent at the moment and having a code.
Thank you. Very well said. That makes total and complete sense, especially when you phrase it as putting in a lot of people together who don't like each other or understand racism. So I view a lot of this as kind of like maybe what when justice is established, what it'll look like. I know justice has yet to be established, or have no idea what it's going to look like. I think that these are all very, very helpful and useful tools for things that have worked in the past that should be, I guess, used in the future. Thank you for your answers. I don't know if Ash wanted to answer. It's okay if she doesn't. That was also it for my. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I didn't really have an answer. It's more of just like, I'm not sure. So that's all I'm gonna say to answer that.
Oh, thank you for your answer, for your 2 cents. Appreciate it. That was it for my notes. So.
Alrighty. So I'll start with the closing comments. The European master of words, master of weapons. Our best defense is to use truth and logic.
For my closing comments, really understanding, I've said it once before, but really understanding the power of words and how they're used and in which way gives them their power. I definitely think goes a long way to replacing the system of white supremacy with justice, understanding the way in which these words are used, the way that Europeans have used words forever to confuse and deceive non-white people. Yurugu has been a great tool in understanding this process and being able to stop it. Thank you, Dr. Ani, for the creation of the Asili, or the concept of the Asili, so that we will never repeat these mistakes again. That's it for my closing comment.
I can go for my closing comments. I would say that I thought that this section was really interesting because I had never really thought about, well, I had thought about humanism, like what Silent Warrior was saying, that when like Europeans use humanism as a way to like exclude non-white people because they just consider them to be non-humans or subhumans. But I had never really thought about humanism in comparison to like a concrete humane behavior. And I think this section ties in really greatly with the chapter earlier about rhetoric and the idea that I think what O5 was saying about double speak, like the European speaks in a way and then their actions are completely different, and somehow non-white people fall for it almost all the time. So thought that was interesting, and overall I think it was just a really interesting discussion. And I think Dr. Ani, I wish I could just talk to her now because I'm so interested in her opinions on like the state of a lot of like how we talked about BLM and stuff like that, the state of a lot of these things. It would be really interesting to get her opinion on it, because I think she has a really, really beneficial perspective that is unfortunately, I don't want to say lost, but just not accessible because a lot of people don't even know about Yurugu. So yeah.
Silent Warrior, would you like to share a closing comment?
Is it possible to get in to have contact with Dr. Ani?
I would say through some possibly through some massive research and asking around possibly. I know some folks from the Wilson Institutes were able to get her to come to their book study once upon a time, years ago, and so I'm sure it's possible, but will be quite the task.
I wonder how, yeah, it would be nice to even send her a message and say thank you from our book club to let her know that we have been following her book. She would probably appreciate that.
Agreed.
I think it's been a good discussion, and I like books that make me go aha, like wow, and this book is doing that. It's somewhat challenging writing to like grasp it all on just the first reading, and but I feel like I'm learning, and I'm learning her point, and I kept jotting some things down like climate change and some of the current discussions that are happening now. You can just see, for example, like this discussion about the Illuminati and how the most powerful elite work and what their plans are for the future, and like the book Ash recommended, Brave New World. It will be those things seem to make more sense now with the conceptual foundation of this book. Yeah, the analysis of the white supremacy culture and thought system is constructive and helpful. So thanks for letting me join this discussion. And I'll have read the right pages for next Friday.
Thank you for being here, Sarah. Would you like to? Was that your closing comments?
Yeah, that's it.
All right. Thank everyone for their great insight and sharing. I'm gonna wrap it up there. Oops, all right.